In this video, we'll show you how to replace the ball joint on your Subaru Baja. This is located in the front of the vehicle and part of the suspension. Let's get started. With the vehicle raised and supported, we can go ahead and remove our wheel. We can remove the lug nuts with a 19mm. If the wheel's stuck on, you can thread one lug nut on a few turns. I'm going to use a dead blow hammer on the back side of the wheel. I'm going to strike the tire, trying not to hit the rim. And we can remove our wheel. To remove the brake caliper, we have two 17mm bolts on the back side of the knuckle. I'm going to leave that one in just a little bit while I loosen up the other one. When we remove the caliper, it's good to use something to hang up the caliper and secure it. That way it doesn't put any stress on the hose. We can pull the caliper off, and I'm going to use my securing strap to support the caliper. We can go ahead and remove the rotor. We'll remove the axle nut with a 32mm socket. There's a good chance that your axle is stuck in the hub. We're going to want to free that up using a punch and a hammer. Now looking at the tie rod, we would usually have a cotter pin here. Ours is pretty rusted out. I'm just going to break off each end and make it so that I can get the socket on there. Just use a wire brush to clean up the edges. Make it a little easier to get the socket on. Now we can remove this with a 19mm. Now we'll thread the nut back on just a little bit. Now I'm going to strike the end of the knuckle with a hammer. We can use a 12mm to remove the ABS sensor bolt. Using a set of side cutters, we can bend back the ears of the cotter pin. And then you can start to grab the cotter pin on the back side and pry it out. We can remove the nut for the ball joint with a 17 millimeter. Now we can go ahead and remove the lower bolt for the sway bar link using a 12 millimeter. Now I'm using a pry bar and a hook on the lower control arm. We'll go ahead and lower that down and off the ball joint. Pop the outer axle stub out. Now we can remove the pinch bolt for the ball joint. Normally this would be a 14. In our case, it looks like it's been replaced before, so we have a 13 here. Now I'll be using an air hammer and chiseling in just on the edge right here and starting to pry downwards. Now I'm going to use a bore brush on a drill and clean out the hole where the ball joint goes. It's good to apply a little bit of anti-seize to the ball joint. And get the ball joint into the knuckle. If you can't get the ball joint to set in all the way by hand, you can use a soft dead blow hammer. We'll get the pinch bolt in. We'll just snug that up for now. Now we can lube the shaft of the axle. Just on the splines though, you want to try to avoid getting any on the threads. Now we can get the axle lined up with the hub. Now we can pry down on the arm. Get the ball joint lined up. And get the castle nut onto the ball joint. We can snug that up. We can torque this to 29 foot-pounds. Once we've torqued the castle nut, we need to turn this an additional amount until the hole lines up for the cotter pin. We can install the cotter pin. Now using a set of side cutters, you can turn each of the ears around the nut. That'll help keep it from spinning. And we can torque the ball joint pinch bolt to 37 foot-pounds. We'll get the sway bar back into the control arm. I'm going to use a punch to line up the sway bar link with the control arm. Get the nut started on. We'll just snug that down. We can torque it to 33 foot-pounds. Now we can get our outer tie rod back into the knuckle. We can snug that down. And we can torque this to 20 foot-pounds. In order to get the cotter pin in, you may need to turn the nut in order for the crenellations to line up with the hole for the cotter pin. We get our cotter pin in. Then grab each ear of the cotter pin and bend it around the nut. We get our ABS wheel speed sensor back in the knuckle. And we'll snug that up. It's good to apply some anti-seize on the hub, especially on the hub-centric ring in the middle. Now we can install the rotor. And I like to use an old axle nut and one of the lug nuts. And that'll help hold the rotor to the hub while we install the brake caliper. Now we can line the caliper up over the rotor. Now we'll line up the caliper with the knuckle. And get our caliper bracket bolts started in. And we can torque the caliper bracket bolts to 58 foot-pounds. We'll remove our lug nut and the old axle nut. And we can install the axle nut onto the axle. We'll snug down the axle nut. If you don't have someone to hold the brake pedal for you, you can certainly use a pry bar between two of the studs. You want to be careful not to damage the studs while you do this though. And we can torque the axle nut to 162 foot-pounds. There's a small notch at the end of the axle. We're going to peen the axle nut so that it won't spin backwards. And we can install our wheel. Just line up each of the studs. We can hold the wheel up to the hub and get one of the lug nuts started in. Get that one in all the way, and that'll hold it in while we get the rest on. Now we can snug these up.
We can torque these to 80 foot-pounds in a star pattern.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.